So I'm standing here in the Wenalt Wood, which is on the northern edge of Cardiff. It's, as I understand it, one of the most ancient woods in South Wales, at least. It's about 1,000 years old, or at least it's recorded from the year approximately 1100. It likely extends to an era before that, but it is typical of the landscape that the early saints of Wales would have inhabited. It's an incredible place, and it's a place that I come alone, I come with my family, and indeed I even come with parishioners when we want to discuss things and re-root ourselves in the faith to which we subscribe. But perhaps you can see why. This is only the smallest glimpse of it. It goes on for many acres, but here you get in touch not only with God's creation, but with the very soil on which the Christian faith grew from the earliest days here in Wales and across the British Islands. In this series on British Christianity, we'll be exploring the ancient roots of the Orthodox faith in these islands. When I say these islands, I mean not just my own home of Wales and its neighbouring England, but of course also Scotland and Ireland. I have a background in British Christianity, you might say. First, because I grew up as an Anglican, where my very first parish was given over to the dedication of St. Bede. So I was aware of some of the early saints from the very outset. But it was when I undertook my academic work on St. Theodore of Tarsus and followed the career of this great man who was, of course, born in the city of St. Paul and lived in Syria, then Constantinople, and finally Rome before being sent to the windswept, foggy, rather rainy shores of Kent. Now, we won't stop there. There is so much to explore. Over the last few weeks, I've been traipsing about my adopted country of Wales with Father Andrew Stephen Damick as we've gone on pilgrimage to meet the saints of this country in particular. And it's been a real joy. It's been incredibly eye-opening to learn about the witness that has existed here to the faith going back as far even as the early 4th century. Many ask the question, well, where did Christianity come from? And we'll often refer to Saint Alban, the proto-martyr and patron of England, at least in some ways, as an example of a Roman who might have brought the faith here. But I want to set academics aside and consider the legend of someone like Saint Joseph of Arimathea and how it is he might have actually planted the seeds of faith in these lands before it was then taken up with zest, with zeal by the incredible saints, particularly in the 6th century, who have left behind traces of their witness in the form of things like, for example, holy wells. We'll see some of those wells and we'll learn more what they mean to us as Orthodox Christians in the 21st century. So come along with me on this journey and explore with me how it is that Orthodoxy properly belongs, even here in the West. How it is that as Orthodox Christians, we're not disconnected from the lands in which we dwell today, but rather might look to them for the origins of our faith and see that even as we go to divine liturgy in exotic languages today, we're not doing so in a way that is disconnected with the practice of early Christians. To start a video like this, a video that seeks to tell the story of Orthodoxy in Britain, I think we really need to start with the story of Orthodoxy in the world. And there are a number of reasons for this, but we'll begin with the fact that land is God's. It's God's in creation, but even if we were to talk about the fall as having removed it from God's hands, we turn to the incarnation of the Logos and see that if it was ever out of God's hands, it was certainly reappropriated by him then. After all, what is the story of the Incarnation except the heavenly Word taking on flesh, the very stuff of the soil on which we now stand, and sanctifying it by his presence and by his actions? And so the story of Orthodoxy in Britain really begins with creation, can be said to extend through the story of the Incarnation. But then if we want to look at the formal institution of the Church, we can even say that while the life of the Church was planted here very early on, it never really left. And to say that it never really left may raise the eyebrows of some. Yet, if we think about the Orthodox Church as having been under a certain captivity, there's a relationship, a deep relationship, between what we find in Britain today and what we find in places like Greece, in places like the Near East, and in places like Russia, where, of course, we can think of the surge of Islam from the Arabian Peninsula that pushed up towards the Mediterranean. We can think of the Ottoman captivity of the Greek Church and the Soviet captivity of the Russian Church. So there really isn't a place where the Church has ever been utterly free. Now, that being the case, what is Orthodoxy in Britain? What does that look like? To answer that question, I think we can turn first to the work of the Venerable Bede. And I want to say a little something about him, because he has always been an unspeakable inspiration to me personally. I was raised as an Anglican in a very warm and, I'll say, Orthodox parish in Winnipeg, Canada. And it was a parish dedicated to the Venerable Bede. For all that, it was only later in life that I discovered his meaning and what it is he gave to the Christian Church. But he tells the story of Christianity as it grew here on the very same soil that these ancient trees behind me grow. And he portrays a church that extends back deep in time, even compared to when he was writing in the early 8th century. It's from Bede we learn the story of Saint Alban, the proto-martyr, a Roman soldier who lost his life for his faith. But we can turn at roughly the same time, or perhaps even earlier, to the martyrdoms of Saints Aaron and Saint Julius, who gave up their lives for the faith not far from here in a place called Caerleon. We'll explore Caerleon in a future episode, but Saints Aaron and Julius, of whom not a lot is known, are said to have lost their lives as Romans in that Roman settlement as early as the early 4th century. Now, this is incredible because it isn't what you expect. Normally, when we think of British Christianity, our thoughts turn first to the example of the Celtic Christians. The reason for this is that the Celtic tribes were the first inhabitants of these lands and existed here before the Romans ever even arrived. They have a Christianity that is distinct to what was happening on the continent. And it's characterized both in scholarly terms, but even in legendary terms, by an emphasis on monasticism, by an association with the natural environment. And if you ever question that, you only need to look around me now to understand how that might have been the case. The story of St. Melengath, a woman in the early 6th century, found herself in the middle of rural Wales. I suppose all Wales would have been rural at the time, but in the middle of Wales, surrounded by mountains. And it is said that there was a local chieftain on the hunt, and while he was chasing his prey, which was a hare, the hare took refuge under the skirt of her dress. And for this reason, she's seen as a patron saint of rabbits or of hares. But it's just one example of the association we make between the Celtic Christians and nature, whether that's in the form of trees or of animals. But the fact is, Christianity here has been nourished by the soil. It has drunk deep from the waters that run both underneath our feet, but equally from the skies, almost perpetually, I might add, because if you can hear the patter of water around me right now, it's due to the fact that it was raining this morning and it is still running off the leaves. So water, the soil, the land itself, and this wonderful creation is what nourished faith here from the earliest days. Christianity, it belongs here in Britain. Orthodoxy, to which I subscribe and to which perhaps many of you subscribe, is the ancient faith of this place, of the whole of the world around us. And it is something that we can explore by knowing something about how it developed, how it took root and grew, and how it has nourished the people across time, whether they've known it or not. And it is something that we will continue to explore together here. So what does this ancient Christianity look like? I mentioned St. Melengeth, but actually I want to address first some of the romantic notions we have of Celtic Christianity. These are oft criticized by scholars in particular as being imbued with a romanticism that doesn't really help us get through to the real Christianity that existed. And yet, I think there's immense value to some of the romantic notions. There's nothing wrong with understanding that these saints lived a certain way, whatever that entailed. Where we could potentially get off track is by thinking that somehow it was replete with mystery, but divorced from the work of the Holy Spirit. It never was. The Spirit was present with these people, and the symbols they leave behind, the art that comes down to us, the famous Celtic knotwork that we see in such deposits as the Book of Kells, and intermingled with Saxon art and even Byzantine motifs in the Lindisfarne Gospels. These are all signs of how they both appropriated and expressed the faith. And we should be excited by that. We may even be romanced by it. But to anybody who thinks we should be more academic about it and somehow just understand that these motifs, these images were just part of a culture, well, to that I say that it misunderstands. It fails to account for the fact that, no, indeed, the hands of those monks, for example, who illustrated, who illumined the Gospels, those were hands that were moved by the Spirit himself. And we are right as Orthodox Christians to see our faith as having emerged from the soil, as having been expressed through these early saints, and as having a particular identity, an identity that I have no problem calling Celtic.